For years, video stores were an essential way to exploring and discovering the films that you will love for the rest of your life. But unfortunately, there's only one left, and that is the last video store. Welcome into it. I'm your host, Alexei, and joining me today to talk about a bunch of their favorite movies is one of my most treasured, cherished, beloved filmmakers of all time. It's David Lowery. I'm going to tell you right now, the film that I love the most from the last decade is The Green Knight. This guy directed it. So I'm actually quite thrilled to have him on the show. One of the very first films I ever reviewed in any kind of professional sense in podcasting was Ain't Them Body Saints, his 2013 film, and I absolutely adored it. So I've made sure to see each one of his films, if I can, in the cinema since then, including The Old Man and the Gun with Sissy, Spacek and Robert Redford, his adaptation live action remake of Pete's Dragon, and of course A Ghost Story, which I was lucky enough to see at the Sydney Film Festival many years ago. One of the reasons we're lucky enough to have him on the show is that we're here, the last video store is here in Melbourne for the Melbourne International Film Festival right now. We've left Batuta just for one episode to come on down to talk to David Lowery, and I'll also be hosting a conversation with David Lowery at the Melbourne International Film Festival, a masterclass talking through his works. That is this Saturday. If you're listening to this or watching this right now, is this Saturday, the 24th of August. This Saturday, the 24th of August, I'd love to see you there. There is a link in the show notes, 2 tickets to that, so pick them up, come hang out with me and David Lowery, and check out a bunch of films at the Melbourne International Film Festival. There are so many great films for you to discover here. It's like a freaking video store took over a whole city, I might say. So thank you to Melbourne International Film Festival for getting David Lowery onto the show to talk about his favorite movies in the style of an old school video store rental combo of 1 overnight new release film, 2 weeklies, which are some of his all-time favorites, and then I'll bestow upon him a recommendation based on his taste. And if you want to jump in to the cult like that and get your own bespoke customized recommendation from me, all you need to do is send us in a DM to our Instagram at Last Video Store Batuta, comments on one of our videos on our YouTube, give us a review on wherever you get your podcast from. It could be a weird app or it could be Apple or Spotify, and I will give you a recommendation. And I'm going to give one to Quieton right now. Morning, Alexei. Love the pod and all your others. Been watching a bunch of great Australian films on your recommendations as well. It's been super fun. As for this show, I have my 3 picks. Overnight, The Iron Claw, great wrestling drama. Weekly, Mandy, one of great horror films starring Nicolas Cage, and Akira, the definitive anime film. Thanks, mate. Forgot to mention I'm Yaz's brother, my friend, and a former Leichhardt High boy as well. Love you, brother, Quieton. Thank you, Quieton. I love you too. Leichhardt boys for life. And my recommendation to you, I'm going to jump off The Iron Claw. I'm into wrestling these days as well, man, and I'm going to recommend you what I think is the best wrestling documentary. It's called Hitman Heart: Wrestling with Shadows. This film is phenomenal in the way that it explores wrestling. It's all about one incident in time, the infamous Montreal Screwjob. If you don't know what that means, watch Hitman Heart: Wrestling with Shadows, and you'll freaking find out and have your mind absolutely blown. Let's get into our chat now with David Lowery, one of the greatest filmmakers working today. David Lowery, thank you so much for jumping into the last video store with me.
I'm excited to be here. I love video stores.
Well, this is the last one, so...
It's very sad.
It's very sad. I'm very glad you could be in here.
It's a melancholy day.
It's absolutely melancholy, but we'll try to keep the vibes as positive as possible.
Great.
I was going to ask you, did you grow up with like a video store? Do you have any of those early video store memories?
Definitely. Like I would say I'm of the generation where going to the video store was a formative experience. And it began not at a video store, but at a grocery store in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is where I was born. And there was a chain of stores called Kohl's, and they had a little corner of videos, VHSs. And oddly, I grew up without television and a VCR. So I would go look at these videos and not even be able to rent them.
So you're just
And
picturing the movies.
I would just be
capturing
conceiving
them.
of these movies based on whatever artwork was on the cover and the images in the back. And of course, the Nightmare on Elm Street series was sort of like the high watermark for really giving my imagination a lot of fodder, because they would show all of the most grotesque dream sequences in the back. And I'd seen the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I've seen that many times, but I didn't really go back and watch the rest of them until a couple of years ago. In fact, it was during COVID, and I realized I'd seen the first one, the third one, but not any of the others.
Yeah.
And it was such a rich experience going back, not just because of the movies, be they that they are what they are, but getting to see those images that had been emblazoned on my head.
You finally see that meatball on that pizza come to life.
You see that, and you see like in the gym, like this woman lifting up the barbells or whatever she's doing. Her shoulder, her elbows are splintering.
Yeah,
and that was like one of the ones that just really just like the sinew. Like those are things I picked up on the back of the VHS boxes.
I think what excites me most about those films, and like the kind of delight in revisiting them, is because they are set in this spectrum of dreams. Like they are all so visually inventive. Like each one is creating and crafting new images just to freak the shit out of you in comical and strange ways.
It's really striking. Like I know that the third one is well regarded. Mm-hmm. But the fourth one that Rennie Harlan directed, I'm getting these right? Rennie Harlan did do the fourth one.
Yeah.
That one is really stunning, and you can totally see why he would have gone, like they would have hired him off of that to go do Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
Because it is visually so imaginative and so big.
Yeah.
Everything is grandiose, and I was like, oh yes, this is the director who had Bruce Willis in an airplane seat blasting up towards the wide angle lens and then falling back down again, because he's got that same approach to that film. And those movies, you can pick them apart all day long, whatever. Watching all 5 of them back to back was a real delight.
It's just so much joy. The one that always gets to me, I think it is in 4, where you see Freddy turn someone into a meatball and eat them on a pizza. That's the best shit I've ever seen in a movie.
And I'd always heard that people denigrating the degree to which they became just comic excuses for Freddy to be, funny.
Yeah.
And that does happen starting in 4. I think up until 4 he's scary, and then in 4 there's lots of catchphrases. He's getting lots of puns, visual and otherwise. But ultimately, it's like, why complain? It was pretty. It kind of made those movies what they are. And yes, not every single one of them needs to be the first one, which was truly terrifying. And to some degree, Wes Craven's New Nightmare went back to that in a really nice fashion. But I appreciated the arc of the Freddy saga over the course of however many years.
It's how it was meant to be. That's why it's the iconic slasher series. Nothing can hold up to it.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you as well about like exploring genre in these years as well, because your films kind of speak so much as like this starting point of communication in genre. Were you kind of exploring everything?
I think so. I really got into film because of Star Wars. So science fiction was obviously a huge gateway. One of the very first things I ever saw was 2001. My grandfather showed me that, starting at a very young age, taped off of television.
That's how it's meant to be seen.
Of course, yeah.
It was so funny. Ads splitting it up.
He started showing that to me probably when I was like 4 years old, and just because I liked spaceships. Yeah. I had like lots of spaceship toys. And so he would always just skip past the Dawn of Man sequence. So it wasn't until years later that I actually realized there was an entire prologue to the movie that I'd never been shown before. I love horror. Like that, it took me a long time to actually see any horror films, because I was not only growing up without a TV and VCR, didn't have the ability to watch them at home, but also I was just scared of everything, and still am. Like I will watch scary movies like this. Like I don't look at the screen half the time because I get scared so easily, but I enjoy it. I love being scared. I love it when a movie can push me to that place. And so if you were to ask me at the age of 3 or 4 what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was Dracula, and then like a year later it was Darth Vader. Like those were like the 2 high watermarks for me of like career aspirations.
Did you ever go into those jobs at all? Did you ever try suck blood? Did you ever try a lightsaber?
If I had just had a little bit more of a sense of like trying to make a living, maybe I would have. But I just decided like making movies was a far more useful way to use my time.
Before we get into your rental combo here, I know that you're kind of in production right now on your next film, Mother Mary, with Anne Hathaway and Michaela Cole.
Yeah.
There's not too much information out there yet. Is there anything that you could kind of tease us a little bit with before we get into our choices?
I hesitate to do so because I'm in the edit right now.
Everything
and just
could
wondering,
change.
I'm like thinking like, what is this movie? Like I knew what I set out to make, and that is indeed what I've made, but it is so wild. Like, and it is not wild in a, I don't even want to describe the way in which it's wild. It's a movie that will provoke, I'm sure, a lot of strong feelings in every possible direction. And it's, you know, it's in so much as it's one of the few movies I've made that's not based on something else. There's no underlying
It's
source
not an
material.
adaptation, yeah.
It feels very true to who I am and very close to me, but it's also consistently surprising me in ways that I did not anticipate. So I don't want to say anything else about it because, yes, it could all change. It probably won't. It's probably pretty much what I've got on my computer now is probably pretty much what it's going to be. It'll just get cleaned up, but it's a weird movie.
And you're editing it yourself?
Yeah.
Cool. I think the films, I love the way that you kind of, when you edit your own films, the kind of way that you explore pacing. I think it's, it really excites me, especially the way you're trying, like, I can't anticipate what we're going to do with this one
I can get a little provocative with my pacing.
New release.
All right, well, let's get into your movies. We're going to start with your new release film.
Yeah.
This is absolutely one of probably my biggest surprise of the year, how much I absolutely love this film. This is from Akasha Stevenson, The First Omen.
Horror.
Which just knocked my socks off. I went in expecting to have a good time and hopefully to be scared, you know, but then...
Were the hands up during this one? Were your eyes covered?
I'm sure there were a few points where they were, but what really got me was like, this is outside of the fact that a genre film and technically an entry in a franchise. It is just such a great piece of filmmaking from start to finish. It is like one of the strongest debuts I've seen in I don't know how long. And I went into it thinking like, everyone is going to be talking about this movie. This movie is going to set the box office on fire. This is a movie that with a capital M that everyone is going to go see. And yet it kind of disappeared a little bit, which was really sad to me because I loved it so much. So I've been trying to spread the word about it. And I wonder if part of the reason that happened is because it opened 6 weeks or less after Immaculate,
very similar,
which was very
film.
similar. In the trailers, if you were to look them back to back, you would think, oh, this is maybe, you might get them confused. And Immaculate is a ton of fun. I love that too.
Yeah.
But The First Omen really was special and is special. And I highly endorse sitting down right now and watching it.
I think the only horrible thing about this film is it being a debut, and I can't go back and watch like 5 or 6 films that led up to it.
Completely, yeah.
Because it's just the way that Akasha Stevenson's balances like both like the pulp genre trappings, this psychological religious horror, but then this absolute almost like masterful craft at understanding how to bring those and awaken them with just like, it's almost humor of like how excessive it gets to. There's this one moment where you see this kind of image build up where it's capturing like that religious horror, and you start seeing the imagery of like, oh, okay, we're starting with this screen, we're pulling out, and you slowly realize that there's the candles are set up in a way to create like eyes looking down the character, and the camera keeps pulling out, and you see that there's also more candles letting up into a smile. And I just found that to be so excessively delightful and such a fun way to continue crafting like what The Omen can even be about.
And you also touched on something that was really important to me with this movie, which is that it balances tone so perfectly because it does go into pulpy excesses at times. It does have nods to the original Omen, and yet it is so undeniably in control of the movie it is trying to make and the story of its protagonist. And that's why I think it functions not only as a horror film, but just as a movie, because you are so invested in her journey and what is going on with her and everything that it doesn't need to be an Omen film or a horror film or a genre film. It is just a legitimately great character drama, in it, but also has all of these other elements that are balanced just perfectly to where you can have these moments of extreme body horror, this classic nunsploitation. It tiptoes in that direction plenty of times as well. It does everything just the right amount, perfectly balanced.
And it's that lead performance by Nell Tigerfree.
Yes.
I think it's just in that right zone as well, where you're just in the space with her, discovering things alongside her. But the way that she kind of heightens those moments as well, it's quite spectacular.
It really is. It really is.
And also Ralph Ineson, a collaborator of yours, the
Yes.
Green Knight himself.
I was delighted to see him.
Yeah.
And I also want to call out whoever cut the first trailer for the movie did an incredible job, because that was like kind of my first, I didn't even know it had been made. And all of a sudden I see this trailer. And for those of you who haven't seen the trailer, every shot is just played in reverse. So there's no dialogue. It is just a bunch of backwards shots, including the one when you mentioned with the candles forming the eye. And it is so striking and so unsettling and so creepy. And it has this magnificent Fever Ray song underneath it that I was like, there's something going on with this movie. This movie is going to be special, I think. And indeed it was.
It's crazy that it didn't light the world on fire from that trailer onwards, because it's just like, I think, for me at least, I love religious horror films. Like,
Yes.
I think to me, they can kind of have that way of capturing the primal fears, like the primitive fears that live deep within inside us about mortality, what is there, what is out there, how should we live? And I think this film does that in a way that, yeah, it's got some elements of The Omen and The Exorcist in there, but the excessiveness is just like, you have a ball with it here. I just think it gets everything right.
It's a testament to the movie that I didn't even think about possession until long after I'd seen it. And then I was like, oh, of course, that was certainly, I think Akasha Stevenson mentions it on an interview at some point. I was like, of course that was a reference point. There's like a very deliberate nod to it. And yet she made a movie that was so her own that I didn't even notice that nod to one of my favorite 80s horror films, like until much later.
Well, that is The First Omen. I'm so glad you brought it here. It's a film I've been freaking dying to talk about. And I think everybody should see it. It's a true delight.
We're getting close to October. It's time to start mainlining horror films. I can't think of a better film to begin the season with
yes,
than
absolutely.
with this one.
And then you've got a bunch of, the original franchise of The Omen to get through as well, which holds similar oddities in there.
Yes.
The great Sam Neill one, where he becomes the president of the United States.
Which also has a weird correlation with possession.
Of course, they've got the same
Omen
lead.
3 and Possession are a bizarre double feature.
I think that's it. You get to Omen 3, then you chuck on Possession.
Yeah.
There you go. Your month is starting to build out right
Yes,
there.
Perfect.
Weekly.
Well, we're going to talk about your weekly highs as well here. The film that you've got in front of you here is from Jim Jarmusch, one of my favorite filmmakers. Another person who I think, like you, explores genre in interesting ways and communicates with genre in interesting ways. You've got his take on the Western Dead Man.
Action.
This was a movie that I watched on VHS with my dad, because my dad liked Westerns and we would sometimes watch them together. This was not the right Western to watch with my father.
Was your dad prepared for this to be the Western?
No, and he didn't like it. And as a result, the experience of watching it with him was uncomfortable and unpleasant, just because the vibes felt so off that ultimately I came away not thinking I liked it. I didn't like it either. And it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years later that I rented it again and watched it again and realized, oh wait, no, this may in fact be my favorite movie of all time. But that first viewing was offset by watching it with a parent. And it's not like there's classic movies that you don't want to see with your parents, movies that have a lot of sex or nudity.
Yeah. Possession might be one of
Possession
those
would be
as
terrible,
well.
Yeah. This one is relatively restrained, but it is. My dad was a theology professor, and this movie is so confrontational to the established tropes of Western civilization, including religion, that I think there was just like a deep feeling of like, oh, this is a movie that is pushing him away, and as a result, pushing me away every step of the way. As we were watching it, it was like just rejecting every tenet of his core beliefs, including like the idea that America is a good place that's founded on noble values, that religion is a formative part of that, and that all of the ills of society are sort of confronted in this film.
And like, especially like, I can imagine for your father going, oh, it's a Western with Robert Mitchum. That's going to be right up my alley.
Totally. And even we were, mutual Johnny Depp fans at that point. Like, he had taken me to see Edward Scissorhands in the cinema when it opened, and Benny and June. And so Johnny Depp was certainly an actor that was like, okay, this guy is someone who we will both enjoy seeing. And I don't think at that point either of us I was a little bit more savvy to this than he was, but like the degree of weirdness that Johnny Depp was really pushing at that point in his career.
And I think it is a really weird movie, this film.
Yes.
And I think for me, I love Jim Jarmusch. I love the way that he kind of explores genre through there. Like, Ghost Dog is one of my favorite films. And I think that's partly because I deeply connect with gangster films, because I myself am gangster, I guess. But I think that's always been like the text that I've been drawn to. I love Westerns as well, but I think Dead Man's always been the Jarmusch film that I've never been able to quite access. And maybe is that kind of like sparseness to the storytelling, or the coldness of Dead Man, and how kind of unconventional it is in its take on like the Western as well.
I should also point out this was the first Jim Jarmusch film I saw.
Wow.
So I was probably 15, and I knew who he was at that point, but I'd never
You'd seen the hair.
Yeah, I knew what he looked like. Yeah, exactly. But I'd never seen any of his movies. So this sort of set the tone. And it was, shortly thereafter that I then started to dig into his other work and realize, like, oh, this must have been quite a shock to the people who love Down by Law, who love Night on Earth. And they go into this movie that it is funny, but the humor is so deadpan and so subdued.
Yeah.
And the tone of it is so mythical that it really feels, I can imagine watching this in the context of his other movies and just being like, oh, Jim Jarmusch is he's either jumped the shark or he's ascended to a new level.
Yes.
And I tend to feel the latter. I think it's certainly my favorite of his films, and I would still argue that it is very possibly the best. And one of the reasons I feel that it's the best is that there's no room for him to hide behind irony. Not that he ever hides behind it, but the irony is a thing that you can sort of couch your own beliefs in, and you can sort of build a little bit of
your own
contextual framework and distance between you and the audience.
Yeah.
And this one removes that to the greatest degree within his body of work.
That's so beautifully put, because I think so much of this film, it is in its own like liminal space. Like, it's a purgatorial film. It's kind of living in its own take on spirituality in its world. I think that's my access point to jump back into it.
It really is. And it has, he is shot early on in the movie, and the rest of the movie is his journey towards accepting death in a context that is at the start of the film unbeknownst to him. Like, he doesn't understand death the way he will understand it. It's a really beautiful rejection of Western tropes of life and death, and it's really interesting to see that side of Jarmusch, because I don't think he's ever, a little bit in Ghost Dog, but really he's never done that again.
And it's like, as well with this film, the silvery black and white photography, I think, really kind of enhances all of that experience.
Absolutely.
Creating that unique space.
What's interesting is that he and Robbie Mueller were, shooting this movie in the Pacific Northwest, and their rule was to never film a landscape that looked like it could be on a postcard. If the landscape was too beautiful, they would go find something else. And yet, when you think about the movie, all you think about are these incredible vistas and incredible landscapes because of the way they photographed them. They found the poetry and the beauty in the more backwater aspects of the Pacific Northwest. And I'm wondering, what landscapes did they leave behind? Because everything in the film looks so gorgeous.
Can I ask, has your father ever revisited this film?
No, I don't. We may have talked about it again, but no. I wish we had. That would have been really nice.
Yeah. Well, that's Dead Man.
Yeah.
I'm excited to jump back into it myself now.
It's great. I've got the poster on my wall. I've got the Blu-ray. I see it on the big screen every time I have a chance to. And it's a movie that it's one of those movies that is sort of recalibrates me. When I get too caught up in what I'm doing, or too just like, stuck in the storm of influence or of my own tastes, I can go back to Dead Man, and it sort of like recalibrates what I really love about cinema, what I want to do as a practitioner of cinema. It just sets the tone for, or resets the tone for how I want to engage with this art form to which I've dedicated my life.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautifully put. Okay. Well, I'm going to say Dead Man's my favorite movie as well now. You've convinced me. You've absolutely convinced me. You've got one more film on your stack there. This is a film from Aki Kaurismäki, Finnish filmmaker. This is The Other Side of Hope.
Comedy.
And Aki Kaurismäki's films, if people are not familiar, they're kind of like these almost comedic modern fables. He's a filmmaker I've not explored very much. I've seen this one. I think I've seen Le Havre.
Yeah. Those are the two most recent up until this year when he had Fallen Leaves. He's a contemporary of Jarmusch, and I think Jarmusch is partially responsible for his introduction to Western or American audiences. And I think I had seen The Man Without a Past when that came out in 2002 or 2003. And I remember going to see it at the Inwood Cinema in Dallas, Texas, and not really engaging with it. It just didn't, it wasn't the right time, wasn't the right place. It didn't land for me. And I never saw another movie of his again until this January when we had a little bit of downtime. I was supposed to be, on a shoot. That shoot got delayed, and so I was, sitting at home, and my wife and I had, missed Fallen Leaves when it played the previous month, and it was about to be released on Mubi, and we were like, you know what, we should. She had never seen any of his movies. I'd only seen the one, and we decided to just do a deep dive, and it was the most glorious experience, and one that I will, when I'm on my deathbed thinking about fond movie-going experiences, the month we spent just going through the entire body of work of Aki Kaurismäki will be one of those. It was such a joyous and warm, and we're sitting there in the middle of the winter in the cold and watching these movies set in a very cold place, and yet they are so imbued with so much warmth and so much humor, and they were so sensitive and so funny. I don't know. It was a real awakening to me, and I've not been that enthusiastic about a filmmaker's body of work in a long time, and I picked The Other Side of Hope because that was the one we started with. Like it was the first one we sat down and watched, but I could have picked any of them, and it's just a treasure trove. And indeed, they all sort of have melded together in my mind. Most of his movies take place in Helsinki. Le Havre takes place in Le Havre. Obviously, there's a couple others that take place in other cities, but for the most part, they're all there, and they all frequently have the same cast members, so they all sort of feel like every time you watch one, it's a homecoming. You're going back to this place with this beloved cast of characters, even if they're playing new people. These landscapes in these city streets that you recognize, and I just can't. I want to go rewatch all of them again right now.
Yeah, and this one in particular is so beautiful because it is kind of that migrant story. It's about a Syrian asylum seeker that comes to Finland and befriends a restaurateur. So it's like kind of the perfect space for those feelings of fable and storytelling to be awakened for an audience as well and be brought in that way.
I think so. It also is, this is something my wife and I both commented on, his depiction of food in his movies is utterly fascinating. And this one is set in a restaurant, so you get a lot of it. And we were thinking like there should be a food tour of Aki Kaurismäki movies in Helsinki, and we would not go on it because we're both vegan and we couldn't eat a single thing that anyone in these movies eats. But it is such an interesting aspect of his body of work.
How would you describe it in this film?
Well, this movie, because they're opening a restaurant, is very specific. One of the great set pieces in the movie is when the restaurant owner decides to switch up the menu and decide to start offering a Japanese themed cuisine. But generally the food is very fishy.
Yeah.
and
is Finland's wants.
Yes, exactly. And it seems very, the food seems very confrontational. Like their food is very, like, you have to I feel like you'd have to have a strong fortitude to really enjoy it. But that's one of the things that makes it so visually striking and visually appealing.
I think for me, like, cuisine on screen is one of my true areas of fascination, because I think that it's different in this film, but for me, cuisine on screen is like this, I think food and film pair so well together because food is one of those crafts or art forms or ways of connecting to memories in like such a deep way. And because film is a visual and oral medium, you can capture so much of like the sound, the feeling, and the like what it feels like to taste food, and then your brain can kind of fill in all the other gaps as well.
It fills in and then over indexes, so the food actually that you're conjuring in your head is going to be far better than if you were to go then whip up that dish, which I'm sure like I'm not alone. Like after seeing Parasite, everyone went and made Ramdan noodles.
Yes.
and it looked so good. You're watching the movie, it's like, that's all I want to eat right now. And then you go make it and it's fine or whatever. But like, it's never going to be as good as you imagine it being while you're watching the movie.
It never will be. But you can still get those crackling sounds of bubbling away that little boiling water, so you can put your instant noodles in there, and it's going to be halfway there.
Completely.
At least.
The taste of things this year.
That's one of my absolute favorites of the year.
It probably is my favorite of the year. Like that movie. And again, like as a vegan, I can't eat a single thing in that movie. But that does not depreciate the joy I take in watching everyone else prepare and then consume these exquisite dishes.
Well, in that film, of course, they've got the exquisite scene with the ortolan, the famous small little bird drowned in brandy, and you're meant to cover your head with that shroud as you eat it, so
incredible.
God can't see
that
it.
image of everyone just sitting there.
Yes.
It was, oh God, what a wonderful film.
And I would say that is vegan, because you've got the shroud on, no one knows what's going underneath. So you can give that one a shot, I think.
No, I have to draw the line.
Okay, well, no one knows what's going underneath the shroud. I think give it a shot.
I'm glad it's there for other people to enjoy.
Soft pick.
Well, we come to that time in this program where I am now tasked with giving you a film recommendation based on your taste, based on the films that we've talked about. And I'll tell you this, I've been freaking stressing out about this because you are a cinephile. It's true. If I'm a level 10 cinephile, you would at least be a level 25 cinephile, is my guess.
You'd think that, but then there are these random blind spots. And often they come from the fact that I grew up without access to seeing things. So I know about every movie.
Yes.
I've read Roger Ebert's, Movie Home Companion starting at the age of 4, like onward. I know about so many films, but there are still so many I haven't seen.
I'm praying the movie I've got for you was not sitting on that grocery store shelf in Wisconsin.
No, let's go for it.
Okay, I've been trying to think about what possibly could be your blind spots, and I was like, okay, well, Australian cinema is an area of, I would not dare to say expertise for me, but an area of passion for me. And I was trying to think about because I was thinking about your work, I was thinking about genre films, and I'm glad that food came up as well in this discussion. The film that I've chosen for you, I think, is in Australian cinema, one of those unheralded greats, and it's kind of become a rarity as well. So one of those films that if it ever pops up on a streaming service, I just have to watch it because it could be years in between. It's a 1993, I guess, ghost story horror anthology film called Bedevil.
Horror.
By Australian artist and photographer and filmmaker Tracy Moffat. Have you ever heard of this film?
I have not seen it.
I think this is right up your alley because the thing that would kind of most closely compare it to is the Kobayashi film Quieton.
Yep.
Because it is that kind of ghost story, spiritual storytelling, but in Australia from a First Nations perspective. Tracy Moffat is like one of our most celebrated and successful artists on a huge global scale. And this is her only feature film. And it's also the first Australian film made by an Indigenous woman as well. And its kind of connective tissue in Quieton is it's super surrealist. The way that it kind of takes each of these stories, each take a different form. And the way that she experiments is through taking each story through different setting and different place. Like some feel extremely play built, some feel like they're staged, some feel like they are on location. And there's this great sequence where it's all about like the oral tradition of like storytelling and how these ghost stories are passed on through different contexts of Australia, playing on like cultural stereotypes and cultural contexts. And there's this great moment where one of the stories is being told and built around this giant banquet being put together in the outback. And it's just one of those absolute visual and oral films that create so much interest. It's like this idea of creating so much location-based and specific tone. But the thing that separates it most from Quieton is it's funny the entire way through.
Wonderful.
Like without it necessarily being a comedy, but it captures this very specific tone that I think is something that I think you'll personally really quite dig.
Oh, I'm so excited. Everything you're saying it sounds like it's right up my alley. The idea of a film that explores oral tradition and the way in which storytelling evolves and changes over the course of its life and the course of, especially with folklore and mythology, is something I've always been interested in. I feel like I've touched upon it in my films to some degree without ever fully exploring it to the degree that I want to. But it's one of my first great loves in the medium is the idea of the evolution of a story, of the oral tradition of storytelling. And when you mix that in with ghost stories, you're talking about surrealism. I love, Quieton, of course, and one of the things I love about it is like so much of those painted backdrops, those wintry forests that are set, clearly on a stage. It is just such, I love any movie that breaks down reality in that way to these more, artistically rendered components.
I think you'll really dig that aspect of it. And one of the stories itself is told by an absolute icon of Australian stage and screen, Uncle Jack Charles, who passed away a few years ago. But he's one of those most captivating entities ever in Australian arts. And the way that he's able to express a story is so like crackling with humor, but so involving. So I think it'll be a great entry point for you to kind of perhaps explore a little bit more of Australian First Nations film. And right now it is available on a streaming service, so you can watch it in your hotel room here in Australia. Get the laptop open.
Bedeviled. It's on my list for the week.
Hopefully you enjoy it, and if not, I will have failed you. I'm so sorry. I have failed you in my duties.
I generally like everything. It's the more time I spend making movies, the harder it is for me to find fault with films, which isn't to say that I won't be critical of them, but I appreciate the act of making a film so much, and the fact that a movie has been made, because they're so hard to get made, that it is hard for a movie to rub me the wrong way these days.
Okay, well then I've succeeded. You don't need to see the movie. I've done enough.
I can't wait though.
David, thanks so much for joining me here in the Last Video Store. We also have a chat this week here in Melbourne. We'll be talking in depth about your work, a masterclass, if you will. And I'm so looking forward to that. I'm putting this out there as a promotional speech right here at the end of the show because this episode's going out straight away, basically.
Great. Well, I can't wait for our chat on Saturday and hope that some folks show up, and thank you for inviting me to this very, tragically, the last video store I'll ever go to.
Oh, you can come back. You can
okay,
always
good.
go back.
So this one's not closing. It's not closing.
No, we're
it's
open
just the
forever.
last one.
It's just the last one, and you have
Perfect.
to return those movies in, I guess, 1 week, or I will be finding your ass, dude.
I welcome it.
All right, thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
The Last Video Store.
Thank you for checking out The Last Video Store with me, your host, Alexei Toliopoulos. Please subscribe, follow, share the podcast amongst your friends as well. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TikTok, Instagram, Last Video Store Batuta. So check us out and share us in all of those places. And if you want your own bespoke customized recommendation from me, you can submit an online order at any of those places, in a comment, in a 5-star review, with your weeklies and your new release pick, and I will come to you like I did at the top of this episode and give you a recommendation based on your taste. So thank you very much. Love you, love movies.